welcome back to the Writer's Room. This is episode 2, where the focus, I think, in this particular, we just sort of dive right in and I start talking about structure, but, not from a sort of textbook level. I just kind of dive in it. I'm making some assumptions with this particular series in that we have all at one point in our careers have written a screenplay, right? So let's take it from sort of that point of view and dive in a little bit deeper. I have this crazy way of doing outlining that's really controversial, so you got to watch and check it out. I will be taking it forward with each subsequent episode, but it's crazy. In my knowledge, has never been done before, and it's going to be polarizing, and people will be like, what? This guy? No, that's not how you do it. Well, it's part and parcel my philosophy for the creative process, because the creative process taps into our individual imaginations and our individual natures. It's the same with our process. Our process is custom tailored to fit us, our background, our personalities, and our ideas. So you got to check it out. So the other thing that I generally kind of cover in this particular episode is the idea of collaboration and how important it is. I think one of the things that's really sort of difficult to marry is this idea that creativity, especially in the entertainment industry, is a team sport. I can't believe I said that out loud. Those types of statements are anathema to the way I grew up as a kid, and understanding that the creative process was an escape from team sports. I did play team sports, but I think you guys know what I mean. It's writing and drawing and creating music is a very personal experience, and it's a safe haven that represents the very best of you, where you can be absolutely true to yourself without fear of judgment or reprisal, right? Coupled with that is the fact that to create passionate stories, passionate artwork, passionate music, you have to be passionate yourself. And to do that, you have to lay bare your heart and soul onto the page and bleed every moment of happiness, every moment of joy, every moment of sadness in its fullest, undistilled form, and then show everybody to be judged and to be discussed. And yeah, it's not an easy thing to do. Being a creative is a very, very personal and private experience. And then we're thrust into the entertainment industry, where we have to bring that whole philosophy to bear in a team context. Wow. I say this out loud. I've reckoned, being in the industry for so long, it would have nullified a lot of those feelings, but I remember crystal clear, as if it were yesterday, that feeling of first having your work adjudicated. It's tough. And I think to a certain degree, a lot of us still have that trepidation. And I'm here to tell you it's okay. There is a fascinating, wonderful, electric joy of a group of like-minded individuals all synergistically coming up with some fantastic ideas. It just feels great. Now, designing story by committee, that's a whole other issue. So there's a balancing act, as with everything. There's a balancing act involved in terms of how far do you take your personal creative endeavors into a collaborative environment, and when has it gone too far, right? So, yeah, that's not an easy balance to strike, but we'll talk a little bit about it. But in the video, I talk about a lot of the benefits that I see with a collaborative workflow, right? And it's something that I really want to capture in this writer's room. So I talk at length about that, some of the wins that I've seen in terms of collaborative team creativity in the industry on a number of entertainment properties. So check it out. Okay, we'll talk to you guys at the end of the video. As a quick little addendum before we dive into episode 2, man, I can't believe I forgot this, I think as my experience in academia, we always cite our sources. So when I go through my spreadsheet technique, I don't really call out where I learned these brilliant ideas from, and I should. I by no means want to imply that any of these techniques and ideas are solely my own, right? So the big shout out I want to give is to Adam Skelter. My apologies, dude, for not calling you out in the video. But Adam Skelter, he's my new favorite guru. He's a super nice guy, and his series, The Art of Story, brilliant. You guys have to watch it. For me, the big appeal of Adam Skelter is that he hits not only just the right tone of structure and storytelling, but he can also discuss it in sort of a deeper language that brings in philosophy, politics, social observation, psychology, and all that kind of stuff. So perfect for me. It's that sort of depth of mining that I really enjoy. And he's also approachable. The dude looks like a teddy bear. So shout out to Adam Skelter. I believe other references in my techniques, or my adopted techniques rather, is Blake Snyder. Obviously, I reference him quite heavily. I know he's vilified. I know my friends who are also writers out there are probably going, dude, why are you talking about Save the Cat? I'm like, yeah, I know. But I'm harvesting what I think sort of works for me in terms of inspiring me. I'm not following Snyder as if, you know, he were the Bible for how to put together a script. So it's all good. There are a smattering of other techniques in and around that I've picked up over time. Sid Field, Robert McKee, all those guys, right? So if I forget to call anybody out, please let me know, and I'll put one of these on my video. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Something that I want to say straight off the bat, the reason why I do these things, the reason why I've opened up to the entire school, is that I'm a huge fan of collaboration in the arts. I don't think there's really any boundary, right, between various artistic disciplines. And it's not this personal intuition over that. I've actually seen it, right? So Need for Speed Most Wanted was a launch title for the Xbox 360, right? It was the first game in EA's history to beat Madden Football as the #1 title, right? Now, the reason for that, in my honest opinion, is it was developed at EA Black Box, which is a subsidiary of EA. So there are two EA facilities in Vancouver. There's what we call the mothership, EA Central, which was huge, thousands of artists. Very corporate-like structure. Then in downtown Vancouver, where I worked, there was EA Black Box. There was about 100, maybe about 200 staff there, and it was run using what's called a flat hierarchy structure. So what does that mean? The flat hierarchy structure means everything from the producers sat in the bullpen with you to you can walk up to any department lead in any discipline and talk to them. So I'm sort of a Renaissance-ish kind of person. I'm fascinated with everything, right? So I know how to play music. So I go talk to Lance Brown, our sound designer, and say, I wrote this, and then we'd sit over a pair of keyboards and we'd talk about stuff and we'd play music. I'd go over to the cinematics team and go, I did these storyboard shots, and we talked lenses and camera, that kind of a thing. It was amazing. I became good friends with Adrian Vershinin, the writer, the lead writer of all the Need for Speed franchise titles, right? And we would compare script notes and things like that. There was no ambition. Well, look, there was a bit of ambition. We all have ambition. Right? We're all ambitious, and it's part and parcel in our nature. But there was less of that, I think. It was more about people very, very passionate in the way they share ideas, right? And because of that, there was this free-form flow of ideas in that studio that I have not seen since in my career, and I hadn't seen prior to it. And Need for Speed Most Wanted beat Madden as the #1 title. So, you tell me, was it a contributing factor? I think so, right? Because no racing game could ever unseat a sports title, ever. Think about how Americans love sports. Think about how Americans love football. And a racing game? Beat it, right? So, it's not clever marketing. It's not positioning of a particular IP. It's that creative energy, right? And it's something that I think is sorely missing here. We are sitting in design silos. We got people in their respective disciplines not understanding what I understand, that there's a huge crossover. To give you an example, when I'm placing cameras inside the Unreal Engine, I'm talking about lens sizes. I'm talking about cinematography considerations. When I'm placing lights, I'm understanding it from a DOP's point of view. When a game writer writes a game script, it is not separate from TV or film writing. It is identical. It's identical. There are some changes happening now in terms of interactive narrative, but in terms of cinematic sequences, there is zero difference, right? So this is the one thing I want to kind of really impart upon you, and it's why I taught last class about categorical thinking and categorical reasoning. Categorical thinking, I didn't tell you guys that, actually. I said it to one of my other sort of lectures. But thinking in categories is quite easy for us to process data, but it helps us to draw lines in what our disciplines are without seeing that across that border are similarities, right? And we need to see those similarities. So why has cinematography gotten so good in games in the last 10 years? Well, I'll tell you why. Because one day, a bunch of creatives woke up and said, you know what? We need to talk to Roger Deakins, who does cinematography for live action. Roger Deakins went on board for How to Train Your Dragon, CG animation, and talked about live action filming and lighting techniques. Why? Because we can learn from various different disciplines. I'll give you a real quick example. I'm lecturing, and I said I wasn't going to lecture. So a real quick example. It's one of my favorite sort of examples, right? So when photography was, in effect, invented, right? Photographers had that moment of like, well, look at what we can do. We can capture reality, right? And they run around and they go, this is better than a painting. We get instant, well, not instant, but we could get an accurate visual representation of what we point the camera at. So there's a period of mucking about. And then somebody said, well, can we create art? Well, if we can create art, I want to study what the painters did, right? So they went back and then they looked at all the old masters in terms of how they caught light and shadow in an attempt to capture art. So fast forward, a few people start to experiment with, kinetic motion in photography. So, we've got everyone from Thomas Edison to a bunch of other guys experimenting with motion picture cameras, right? So we get that moment of, oh, look at what we can do, that titillation factor. So we got the arrival of the train at La Ciotat, right? So it's like, oh, look at this train, it's freaking everybody out, right? So that's that titillation factor. And then, after that phase passes, somebody goes, wait a minute, we can make art out of this, right? Let's start to take a look at it. Did they go to the photographers? No, they went right to the painters, right? So fast forward to computer graphics, right? Titillation factor. And then now it's kind of like, well, let's make video games an art form. And in the early days, what the video game guys did, and I know I was involved with this, they went and studied the cinematographers and completely freaking missed the point, right? So we were to accurately replicate the T-stop versus the F-stop in terms of how it affects light and capturing image data. We were able to harness global illumination to create that sort of multiple bounce of light and all this other guff, really. It's not guff, actually. It's really important technology, right? So suddenly it's like, we can replicate the exposure latitude of the human eye and blah, 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 blah. And then, we've got all kinds of different light workflows involved. We can set up cameras, all this, and completely miss the point. So at some point in the sort of burgeoning computer games field, people started to look at painters, right? So this is how much we are intertwined. John Lasseter is famous for what reason? He saw computer graphics, and he as an animator said, I want to traditionally animate that. And at the time, it was like cubes and spheres floating around, right? So there's no revolutionary thinking. It's just open your mind, guys, and understanding that all the disciplines are interconnected, and we have a crap ton to learn from film, from fine arts, from design, from animation, from everybody, right? And it also closely replicates my experience in industry studios. Like I said, my door is open to everybody, right? So if you've got friends in textiles design or whatever. It's just like, oh no, I'm a horrible writer. Forget that. Come on down. You know why? Because everybody has stories to tell, and everyone's a writer. Everyone is a writer, right? We just don't know how to write well yet. That's fine. That's normal. Because the corollary is we all know how to run. We're not going to win Olympic medals without training, right? So I refuse to believe this fact that only certain people can write and other people cannot. But I've read a lot of crap out there too, but it's all stuff that can be learned. Again, this one's from that setup. A young street racer girl gets recruited to represent Earth in intergalactic races. Plain and simple. Now, the central character that I want to explore is this. I think one of the taglines that I sent on this script to a producer was, this is a story about a girl who wants to be as good as the boys, who doesn't realize she's the best in the galaxy. It's really about getting that underdog to believe in themselves, right? So this is what I was talking about last class, about thematic considerations. I always try to tell really fun stories. I mean, come on, intergalactic races, but I try to take my thinking to a higher level in terms of thematic considerations, in terms of what is it I'm trying to say, what is the voice I'm trying to get across, right? Okay, so we'll dive right in. Hyper, the first episode, a Spartan child. Fade in. Exterior long, lonely stretch of road, sunset. Heat shimmers off desert-blasted tarmac. A wild splash of colors, Jackson Pollocked across the Hawaiian shirt of a large man with a water buffalo gait, slowly resolves itself in the distance like a Polaroid, in stark contrast to the bleak surroundings. John Bach, a 45-year-old man as large and direct as his name, walks down the shimmering road with the confidence of a man who knows how to shift his girth around in a fight. In one hand, he carries a fire extinguisher. In his other, he carries a DP-12 double-barrel shotgun. A fiery red Lamborghini roars dangerously past on his right. A Dodge Viper on his left. He maintains his metronome stride as the backdraft catches his lion's mane of hair and whips it up in a frenzy around his half grin. Another Lamborghini roars by. A Ferrari, a Porsche, like a hail of missiles. Cars thunder past as Bach confidently threads the needle. Then a large alien hovercraft screams by, followed by a star sled. More cars thunder past, a few urbans, a few exotics, a few galaxy class. A strange conglomerate of modified cars and spacecraft stream past at lightning speed and thundering power. Bach slips the shotgun over one shoulder and examines the extinguisher, as if looking at it for the first time. Ahead of him are the dark, inky tendrils of burning smoke and the bright lick of a few flames. A woman's scream of rage claws through the din, followed by the pop and tinkle of exploding glass. Bach chuckles. As Bach pulls the extinguisher's cotter pin, the sound of more smashing glass, the sudden thud crumple of metal, beats out a rhythm of frustration. More hoarse female cries of rage peal out. As Bach tests the foam release with a couple of short, sharp blasts, a woman's bloody boot kicks out against the side of a metal door. In the middle of the barren road, a Bugatti Veyron burns. Sue-Mi, a 45-year-old woman, hair matted with sweat and blood, stands seething at the wreckage. Extinguisher foam jets past her and sizzles against the smoking wreck. Bach steps up beside her. Jonathan, some things you can't outrun. We're going to have to think of something else. Sue-Mi, I got this. Bach tosses the empty extinguisher at the car and smashes through a window. Jonathan, you were good. Best I ever had. But we all grow up sometime. And age is a son of a bitch. Sue-Mi, this is not how I go. Jonathan, reaction time is a factor, and I am not burning through another million so you can figure out age comes for us all. Even if we did have the time, which we don't. Sue-Mi. So, Jonathan, so we need to find a new you, a younger model. Sue-Mi's rage works across her face, but she knows he's right. Jonathan turns to go. Jonathan, here's to aging gracefully first. He throws her the shotgun. She catches it, incredulous. Jonathan, and you thought I was joking. Jonathan walks away. Sue-Mi snarls, turns towards a burning car, and fires into the wreckage. Exterior. I'll just pause briefly there. The first two pages are very, very, very important. And we'll come back to this, because the original two pages were written differently. And I felt it was more character-driven than the first two, and I'm undecided which to go with. This one is a little bit more of a opening, like, what's going on? right? The whole show about Hyper is about fast cars, fast spaceships, and racing. And I realized that in the opening couple of pages, maybe I should show that, right? So, we'll get on to that. So now we're going to intro the main character, right? So, exterior, Main Street, Santa Cruz, afternoon. A muffler backfires. An engine revs hard. A 17-year-old girl leans up against a stack of old tires. A dirty pen perched behind her left ear. Beside her is a faded sandwich board. Retreads, half price. Across her left breast is an embroidered name tag reading Nikki. She quickly counts out a handful of crumpled bills and places it on the stack of tires next to a torn magazine picture of an Easy Light Power wheelchair. Her movements are crisp and quick. She takes a worn photo out of her breast pocket and smiles down at her. Varsity boy off screen. Nicole? She looks up, stops. Idling in an Audi convertible is a good-looking 19-year-old boy wearing a varsity jacket. Self-consciously, she jams the photo back into her pocket. Nikki, oh, hey. The boy quickly scans her. What happened to you? Nikki, what do you mean? The boy measures her carefully. He smiles. Varsity boy, you still trying to race? Another teenage girl struts down the street, trailing a gaggle of friends. With a dismissive flare of miniskirt, she pauses directly in front of Nikki's eye line and plops into the Audi. She waves off her entourage and kisses the boy quickly. As the boy smiles and shifts into gear, his girlfriend notices Nikki. Girl, oh my God, is that who I think it is? The boy shrugs noncommittally. Girl, didn't you guys used to... Varsity boy, nope. As the Audi pulls away with a squeal of tires and smoke, Nikki winces and whispers under her breath. Nikki, it's Nikki now. She stares at the empty street. So, Nikki, so can't wait to get out of here. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Nikki sighs and pushes off from the stack of tires. She turns into the ramshackle garage behind her called Lunk's Junk. She stops on her heel and turns in the direction of the vanishing Audi. Nikki, it was one date! She wheels back around, marches into the garage, and casually clicks off the ignition of a Ford Mustang, revving through an engine test in one of the greasy stalls. She puts a hand on the car. Nikki, boyfriend, grades, social life, lather, rinse, repeat. It's all just slowing me down, you know? Nikki looks down at her grease-stained fingers, her brow furrowing, a dark shadow passing quickly across her face. The Mustang's headlights stare blankly at her. Nikki, don't look at me like that. She rushes past to a nearby workbench. Behind her, Trey Shaman, a dopey 25-year-old Caucasian male, gawks at her as she scurries about. Nikki, suck at the whole school thing anyway. I mean, what the hell am I going to do with algebra, right? She shrugs her shoulders and turns, spying Trey for the first time. Trey, right. Interior Lunk's Junk, continuous. A blue metal cylinder is slammed down onto a rust-flecked workbench. Nikki, 600 horses, that's a lot of junk in the trunk. Trey's face drops into view, his brow furrowing as he considers the metal ball. Nikki, a scrawny ball of nervous energy, lets out an exasperated sigh. She paces energetically behind the big dopey Trey. CNC mill with HP jets, compact Piranha nozzles, 8-cylinder direct port, universal rails, eBay it. Let's see how far you get. Nikki looks around quickly. Forget that. She sweeps up a tiny brass valve from a workbench and holds it out to him. That's how far you'll get. Trey looks conflicted, his face contorted with indecision. Nikki relents, sighing. She places the valve carefully back on the workbench beside her picture of the power wheelchair. Trey meets Nikki's gaze, then averts his eyes. Nikki, Trey, T-section, what's going on? Trey looks uncomfortable. He has a tightly clenched stack of 10s and 20s. Nikki eyes his money. Trey, it's just, you don't do no refunds, and I ain't never had this much money before. Nikki looks at Trey long and hard. He meets her penetrating gaze. Trey, Danos, it's legit, right? Because I can't be in no more trouble. Nikki, don't be stupid. A sudden explosive ratcheting sound blasts into the garage as a blinding white light fills the room. Nikki and Trey leap back startled. A large lumbering man in his 50s in a rusty old wheelchair enters the room. He slams both fists down on Nikki's workbench, causing the tools to jump and clatter. Lunk, what started 30 minutes ago? Standing behind Lunk is a small, diminutive man wearing a tie and carrying a clipboard. He's a driving examiner. Nikki stares at him. Nikki, Uncle Lunk, I already know how to drive. Lunk, then this should be a walk in the park. Get out there, get legal, and move like you're a half hour late, 'cause you are. So I'll leave it at that. So that's the introduction of our main character. Now, the wonderful thing about this session, and I encourage you guys, as we start developing our ideas, we come up and read them out to each other. Because as I'm reading them out, I'm feeling the problems in all of those sequences, right? So, for me, there are a number of different questions that are quite curious. So, for example, I put in the photo of the wheelchair, and I introduce Uncle Lunk in a wheelchair. She's saving up for the wheelchair, right? I don't know if that's too heavy-handed, so I might go back and explore that, right? But the reason why the wheelchair was written in was to make our protagonist active. So an active protagonist is already in the process of doing something when the story starts. We have a tendency to create passive protagonists. It is in our nature, right? We'll start off, day in the life, ordinary situation, and stuff happens to our main character. Nobody wants to watch that, right? There may be a small audience for that, but you know, I'm here to change my bad habit and then help and convince you guys to change your habit. Always an active protagonist. It's hard when you think about it. Very, very hard to do. Because we're writing from our perspective. Nothing's really sort of happening to us at the moment, and we're hoping that adventure finds us, right? Our heroes are like us. They have to be like us so we can write emotionally, just a smidge higher. They're doing something slightly more than we would do, right? That creates accessibility, but also generates a bit of hope in terms of following the character's journey, things like that. So the boyfriend rejection scene was actually the original opening, right? And I decided it was very sedate. It's not really the kind of opening you want to see when you go see something like Hyper, right? So I moved that around. And I'm still not convinced I should have the whole varsity boys scene in there anyway. But, you know, because I think I spent too much time with the varsity boy just to say Nikki is a reject. And I'm sure there's a quicker way of saying that, right? So I might explore that for a bit. So this pilot's been completed. Just to let you know, this pilot was submitted to Red Planet, got shortlisted, which was quite cool. The feedback notes were awesome, but never quite punched through the quarterfinals. So I want to work on it, right? So making it to a shortlist is an indication that there's something there, but it's not quite crossed the top rung. Right? So that's that. I will also show you how I go about approaching this, which will be quite interesting, and then we'll have kind of conversation from there. So now this is just an alism. This is not an industry standard, right? So I'm about to show you sort of one of the ways that I generally tend to work. So this is a holdover from working in the games industry. I tend to think in spreadsheets, and I used to hate spreadsheets, but I've since learned that they're quite a creative tool. So when I'm thinking about a story, right? I've been through a few different processes, right? Let me start there, okay? So when I go through developing a story, I'm one of those guys who's an outliner, right? So what does that mean? Well, in writing, there are generally accepted two forms of writing. One is not better than the other, right? In novelization, they call the two different styles of writing planner and pantser. Pantser being right by the seat of your pants. Right? In games and animation, they call one style of writer an assassin, the other style a berserker. Oh, and actually, that was taken from Art of Story, Adam Skelter's series of lectures, right? So you have your assassin and your berserker, right? And I'm much more of an assassin. So I plan very, very carefully. I map certain things out, and then I dive and I write, right? Neither one is better than the other. Neither one is more passionate than the other. Right? Just some people just like to dive in like a berserker and write and come up with the story as they go. Perfectly valid. Right? One of the writers I speak with, Helen Black, she's awesome. She's very much a berserker. She has no idea where the story's going when she starts writing, and she's selling 2 series to the BBC at the moment. Right? So one way is not better than the other. Right? I just prefer having a roadmap to see where I'm going. Now, the thing about the outline, though, is I allow myself to veer off. It's kind of like planning a holiday to Thailand and saying, I'm going to go here, 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 and then going, ooh, what is that weird temple in the woods? And off you go, right? So that's very much the way I write. So even though I teach you structure, I want you not to have that dictate how you create. That's just like the death knell, right? Because again, remember the first talk where I said you have to have all that passion and emotion during that creative process? The minute you think structurally, it's gone because you're using a different part of your brain. Okay, so I generally separate off into the three main areas of the spreadsheet that I generally take a look at are synopsis, scenes, and outline. And I'll tell you why I work in a spreadsheet in a second, right? So the first synopsis, I put down some major beat questions for myself, right? And I'll give you guys a copy of this. So I asked myself, this story is what? About who? Who wants what, right? So those are actually who wants but also needs what. So those four questions are actually really, really important in the beginning. This sets up our active protagonist, right? So if you're wondering whether or not your protagonist is active, sit back and ask yourself the first four, right? Because the reason why we've gone for an active protagonist is they are watchable people. I'll give you an example. Somebody standing at a bus stop, and then somebody running by in a panic. Who are you going to follow? You're going to be like, what's going on, right? That's why we need an active protagonist. That gets our audience. Our audience will be like, what are they doing, right? And they will follow, right? So, and then the plot elements come down later. When you say this character sets out to, but then encounters first barrier, second barrier, third barrier, fourth barrier. Throw as many barriers as you can. Because remember, my definition of the story is a problem seemingly unresolvable. These barriers are what make it seemingly unresolvable, right? Think in terms of Steven Spielberg and Raiders of the Lost Ark, when the Jovitos Indians are chasing Indy over the mountain, right? And there's like dozens of them. Spielberg wanted 500 extras, right? You know, he just wanted to throw everything at Indiana Jones. It was Lucas who was like, no, we don't need 500. So yeah, think in terms of those barriers. Then climax, then resolution. Really important at the end of when you're thinking about your story, the main character has changed because of what? Right? You really need to understand that. There's arguments all online about, there doesn't need to be a redemption circle. The character doesn't have to change. Yes, but I'm talking vast majority here. Vast majority, we'd like the character to learn something and to change somehow, right? And I'll tell you why. Because we feel a sense of satisfaction in a way that we've given the character advice. Because remember, I said, as audience, we're one step ahead of the character. So while we're watching, we're going, if you only stop doing this, it'd be all right. But you just keep messing up. So when the character learns, we're like, I told you. Right? And so that sense of satisfaction is a reward for the audience, right? So this is why, one of the things I generally tend to do is talk about structure, but I also tell you why and how it works on audiences and what the reasoning is behind it, right? Okay, so here's another exercise. You don't have to do this. I enjoy doing this. So if I'm creating a character, I'll make a list of 6 things wrong with the character. This was taken from, I think from Blake Snyder. Blake Snyder's book, Save the Cat. Save the Cat is vilified, by the way. It's I read it anyway, because if people vilify something, I'll be like, well, what is this book all about? But Blake Snyder wrote Save the Cat, which gives a, quote, formula for writing a Hollywood screenplay. Look past the formula and understand sort of the theory and the concept behind what he's talking about. In general, Blake Snyder's book is really talking about pacing, right? Rhythm and pacing. So this is why he's always talks about these things. So, things that go wrong, or 6 things wrong with your character, see if you can come up with 6 things that you don't like about your character or the character needs to fix. So in this particular sort of story, I'll ask, for example, in Deathmatch, there has to be a reason why it's about a bunch of characters that get together and decide to become a kill squad, right? So why are they deciding to kill, right? And sometimes we don't think that deeply about the motivations of some of our characters, especially in horror and in action, right? And we got to understand what it is that drives them to do what they do. This is why First Blood was much more powerful out of all of the Rambo movies. And Rambo's been vilified and just made fun of. But if you go back and watch First Blood, it's still really powerful because you have a clear understanding why Rambo did what he did, right? It is crystal clear. And it's really heartfelt. And every time, Rambo didn't just pick up a bunch of guns and start shooting up the place. He was driven to it. And he tried to be a good person. And it just didn't work for him. And the pressures that are put on him and why he snaps and all that kind of stuff, it all sort of comes through. So understanding the reasons why is important. This was severely lacking in the subsequent Rambo sequels, which is why we make fun of Rambo, right? So that's the first. Now, once I've figured that sort of spine out, I'll take a look at, I'm just wondering if I've added my additional columns outside. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about this. So in my top planning stage 2, I'll have a column for literary device or plot device, because a lot of times I'll try to think of things that are symbolic or things that I can, put in as devices, right? You can see it's blank because I don't let that dictate too much. It's just like, oh yeah, this toy could represent, lost innocence or whatever, right? I also try to figure out in the character, what is their conscious desire and their unconscious drive, right? So this is really important. It'll be called various different things in various other forms of writing. There'll be want versus need. There'll be thematic story versus tracking story. Basically, you're telling 2 stories at the same time. An external problem that needs to be solved and an internal journey, right? So, there's an Achilles heel. I'm a firm believer in the Achilles heel or the core wound. There has to be something inside your main character that is stopping them from being a hero, right? There has to be. And it has to be something that they can conquer. And that's where you bring people in on an emotional level, right? So, for example, with Hyper, what is her core wound? What is her core wound? Well, it ties with why she wants to go fast, and she doesn't realize this. But she lives with her Uncle Lunk, and her parents left, right? And so she doesn't feel. Subconsciously, she thinks if she goes fast enough, she'll catch up to them. That's the pain to her, right? So I love that, I can really sort of feel that, right? So this is what I'm talking about. Understanding that core wound, what is that emotional sort of drive, right? So, and these are, again, the types of stories I like to tell, right? So, all right, so then we've got, I'll try and figure out the theme. Now, don't worry about theme. I think in English classes in school, it's a bit of a misnomer because they say you got to understand theme. What's the theme of this story? What's the theme? When you create a story, do you have your theme? And it's like, theme is the hardest thing to figure out for a writer. Majority of my friends who write, they generally figure out their theme either partway through writing or at the end of it. During the creating process, your theme may evolve as well. There's a quote from another writer, I wish I could remember who it was. She said, blessed is the writer who knows their theme at the beginning of the writing process, right? So, but it's something that I feel strongly about in terms of having that in your stories. Because if you have a resonant theme, and I'm not talking, good will defeat evil, not that kind of stuff. Some sort of observation on life. Well, this is where your writer's voice comes out as well. If you can have an observation of life that that you can bring to the world, then you will have a. Not only will you bring your kind of emotional style to your story and your own voice to your story, but you'll hit on something that everyone can relate to. Right? Okay, so that's my first process. I try to answer all these questions about my world. At this point, I may have written a few pages, or it might just be an idea germinating in my head. To give you an idea in general, the producers I work with in Malaysia and Hong Kong, they generally want to see, it's really strange, they generally want to see 3 pages of a script. So I generally dive in the script straight away. So this is strange because it breaks with convention you guys might be taught. The convention is you do an elevator pitch, then you do an outline, and then you do a synopsis, and then the producer tells you to go to pages, and then you start writing. Sometimes it's not like that. So I do generally tend to dive into writing, but at some point I go, I need to figure this stuff out. Right? What I don't need to figure out, and this might be a good tip for you, what I don't need to figure out is character names. That's why they're all cheesy, right? I just chuck them in real fast. I don't need to figure out title, not really. Throw it down, right? The harder pieces to figure out are the storytelling chunks and whether the rhythm is working. The science of the sci-fi doesn't need to be figured out, right? How that lightsaber works or how that computer terminal connects with that network, you don't have to figure that out, right? It is good to figure it out, but these are the more important questions in the beginning. Okay, so if we go to scenes, this is my worksheet, right? So in this worksheet, I'll map out Act 1, Act 1, Sequence 1, Sequence 2, and Sequence 3. So that's my Act 1. I follow the 3-act structure in AE4. What does that mean? Act 1, Act 2A, Act 2, 2B, Act 3, right? So there's a reason why I split Act 2 in the middle. So it's 3-act structure, but really 4, right? The midpoint is the point in your story where all expectations from both audience and hero whip around 180 degrees, and the story goes off in a different direction, right? It's generally an accelerant. So at the midpoint, you're rushing to the resolution, right? So I further break down Act 1 into 3 or 4 sequences just to help me map things out. So I also map out scenes. Now this is quite helpful, but can be detrimental. I know that in most pilot scripts, there's generally about 40 scenes. And this is, I started thinking in terms of 40 scenes, 40 sequences. I started thinking in terms of sequences because it's good to be slightly aware of your budget, if you know what I mean, right? So I've read a lot of scripts where there's like hundreds of scenes. And it's like, you're gonna have to go to that location and shoot that, that's 3 days, and then that location, that's another 5 days, and that, it becomes unachievable, right? And I know that the whole focus of your script is story, and that when producers are reading it, they're focusing on your narrative power, but somewhere in the back of their mind, they're going, we can't shoot this, right? And you don't want that. You absolutely don't want that. So I break down into the sequences, and then I map out each scene. So this is where I do my work writing, right? So I'll put in notes. I'll put in snippets of dialogue that inspire me. Man, are you a freak or just stupid? I don't even know what you look like. And I'll write bits of dialogue. And then I'll maybe write dot points. He has to find this here. This has to happen here. So I'm just I'm not really writing prosy as of yet. I'm just sort of figuring out the structure of the story. This is what I print out and have beside my desk when I go to pages and I just start writing. So I can go, we tend to meander sometimes as writers. So if I feel myself meandering, I'll look and I'll go, okay, I need to get the story back on track. I'm wasting too much time. No one cares about them standing by the high school locker talking about how much they hate math class, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, we'll cut that conversation short. You know what I mean? It's like a sheet that reminds me to stay on track, right? So that's connected to the outline. And this outline, this is why I use an Excel spreadsheet. All the grayed out areas are connected to the data in the scenes sheet. And then I can go in and sort of build it out a little bit more, right? So I'm building out events, and I'm talking about different devices. So you can see here I've got letter drops in through letterbox. Lance picks it up while he's getting ready to tackle the Harley. And that's our beginning. Morning coffee, Lance shoos away a raccoon, reads his younger brother's letter. The younger brother's letter says, get a goddamn phone, and we decided to call him Holden, and it's a picture of his little brother with their baby, right? So I'm thinking, is that too ordinary? So I put that little question in the column. So that kind of thing. I'll identify what is the conflict and what is the resolution of that particular scene. It's really helpful. I find it really helpful. So you can see why I'm very much a planner when it comes to writing, right? I get a thrill out of it. Really, I enjoy it. Right? But then when I go to pages, I'm hoping that the samples I've read last time and this time show that I'm very passionate about language. I love working with words and that kind of thing, right? Okay, so there's that, and then everything is connected to this. Oh, it's broken. But all the data from the different sheets feeds in here, right? So this gives me an outline of Act 1, and then Act 2, and Act 3, and I can shuffle scenes around like this, right? Because I used to do this with cue cards and storyboard panels, and it's hugely helpful. This is okay, but it doesn't replace the story wall. I'm a huge fan of the story wall. For those of you who don't know, as a storyboard artist, or even during the writing process, what we'll do is we'll take everything that I've talked about in the outline. Guy picks up gun here, put that on a cue card, put that on the wall, right? Guy shoots his boss, put that, the cue card, put it on the wall. Goes home and lies to his wife, right? And we might go, okay, let's take that lie. Let's have that lying moment to the wife happen before he goes and gets his gun. Let's make that lie different, you know, and that kind of thing. We get to shuffle scenes around and really figure out if the rhythm and pacing work. We do the same thing with storyboards. So we'll sit there and we'll go, we'll take that scene and actually move it in here. We'll take these 4 scenes in the beginning and trash them. Let's start the story in the middle of what's going on. And then we'll step back and we'll take a look at it. This is what I love about the story wall. You get a huge overview of your episode. That's massive, right? Because you can go, all right, I can feel the sequence of shots and the rhythm of it, and it's going to be good. I can see those areas where it's going to pick up and pace and et cetera, right? So yeah, that's, this pales in comparison, but it's still, I can grab these guys, I can move them around, and I can adjust them, right? So I can say, oh, I want to put that scene there, et cetera, right? So it's quite helpful for me when I'm doing another level of thinking and I'm trying to organize scenes all over the place. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is the difference in style of writing. You guys notice that the Exist script that I read out was very staccato style, right? And then Hyper was a little bit more prosy in style. Do you guys notice that? Not saying one's right or wrong. Here, I'll show you. Just to make a quick point of it, right? So we've got, you know, heat shimmers off desert blasted tarmac. Wild splash of colors, Jackson Pollock across the Hawaiian shirt of a large man, right? And then we go over to Exist, and it's very sparse, right? Let's go to the intro, because it's punchier, right? Young girl dressed in secondhand Primark. Well, that's a little bit prosier, but a vague form scurries past. Let's find something that's really staccato. Yeah, an apparition of Sue's dad charges in from the kitchen, feral. It runs towards them, Key fires. He drops Sue to the floor, fires again, this time with 2 hands. Bullets glimmer in an unearthly hail of light and energy. See the difference? Right? Almost sentence fragments versus complete paragraphs. One is not right or wrong. One is not better than the other, right? I do it for pacing. Right? So here's the thing. Remember I was saying last time, you got to think visually. You got to think in terms of how it's shot. You got to watch the movie unfolding. So if I have a camera shot that's panning across the classroom, and it's nice and slow, and there's classical music playing, and golden rays of dawn are coming in through the room, I'm going to write prosy, right? Because it stretches that scene out. It also gives the reader a feeling of that they're reading something poetic, which is what you want the audience to feel, right? If you have a nice classical music scene with sun beaming in through the windows. And then an action sequence where everything's fast, a big knife fight, very staccato writing, very minimal information. If you give your audience minimal information during a fight, it's replicating how fast the combatants have to think, and therefore raises energy, raises intensity, right?
Like when you're writing beats for it.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, very much so. And I think one of the things that I find with the beat script is sometimes I can take sections of it verbatim and put it in the screenplay. Not all of it, but it really works because it helps me to determine how fast or slow. So for example, if I'm writing a big action sequence, like the one where the zombies in the hallway come after my guy, and I'm going too prosy about it, it slows it all down when I really want to ratchet up the intensity. So what I'll tend to do is I'll go the staccato moment for the climax from the beat sheet. Then what I'll do is I'll think about how can I start slightly prosy and increase the intensity, right? So that's all, I love stuff like that. I find that stuff fun, right? So yeah, altering your writing style, you can do and play with words a little bit if it serves the shot in the movie that you're creating, right? I'm loath to bring up this example, but it's a good example. One I do not recommend for you guys. This writer got away with it because they're known in Hollywood. But the screenplay for A Quiet Place, fantastic, right? So you're reading about the father. Have you guys seen A Quiet Place? It's good. It's good. It's about these aliens invading Earth, and they're triggered by sound. So anybody makes a sound, boom, they kill them, right? So everybody has to be really super quiet. In the screenplay, there's a scene where the father is approaching a potential situation of danger. I think there's a creature hiding, right? And he's trying to be very quiet, so he takes, and then you turn the page one step. That's all that's written on the blank page. 2 steps, blank page, 3. That's beautiful, it's beautiful. But understanding that you are playing with words and format to create a visual movie in your audience is really important. This is what I was talking about how screenwriting is a different art form to prose writing. So when I said that it's easy for us to understand poetry and prose are different, but we have difficulty going prose and screenwriting. Right? And I want to take an axe and put it right down the middle and say, no, screenplay is it's like poetry. It's like a completely different form of writing. It's also incredibly optimized. I have a tendency to go overboard with this, but it's entirely optimized. So I'll show you what I mean. Reading this back, I might redo it. But I'm thinking about a shot on my main character's shirt first, and we come out and we go to a head reveal. So I'm trying to write it that way. So I write a wild splash of colors, Jackson Pollock across the Hawaiian shirt of a large man with a watered buffalo gait. Calm down, Al. That's just too much. You know, that's what I feel when I'm reading it. I'm just trying to throw everything out there. But I'm trying to create an image order or a sequence of how I reveal visuals, and I think it's quite busy. Whereas John Bach, 45-year-old man, as large and direct as his name. I like that. You know, it gives us sort of a sense of who that person is. I think in the Exist script, I described one bully. I introduced one bully as Liam, a kid with an Asbo face, right? So when I say something like kid with an Asbo face, I'm hoping you guys get an instant sort of idea of what the kid looks like, right? That's what I'm talking about, economy of writing, right? And producers love that stuff. So if you can say volumes in 1 or 2 words, that'll get you read, right? Which is, let's not beat around the bush. Your primary goal is to be read, and you should be happy about that. Whether or not a movie gets made or a television show gets made, don't worry about that. The fact that an EP reads your script should validate you enough, right? Because, the reason why I say that, because there's lots of other factors that come in for a film or a TV show not being made. Politics, budget, availability, all kinds of other stuff. But if you get read, you know your story is capturing people, right? So you know somebody's gone, this is making a really good movie, right? And that is the first and major hurdle that you need to get past. So what do I think is hampering my writing at the moment? Why I'm getting close but not getting over the bar? I think a lot of it has to do with just a more refined sense of pacing in terms of television and film properties, and being able to economize even more in storytelling. And the difference is, in the animation world, animation scripts are identical to television scripts, but they tend to spend a little bit more time breaking down action, right? Because all that stuff has to be animated. So we'll describe, a fight sequence. We may go move by move, which would be a death knell for TV screenplay. But we go move by move, so the animators or the storyboard guys know how to storyboard it and kind of bring it to life. By the way, just as an aside too, in some animation studios, like on Ed, Edd n Eddy, the writer will only give you 1 paragraph, and then so it's literally up to us to come up with the story. So sometimes stories develop that way. In animation, it's either script, storyboard only, or brief and storyboard. So the latest Mad Max movie, Fury Road, was done purely storyboard. There was no screenplay written for it. So, yeah. So a lot of people are experimenting with the form, right? Just to try a few different things. So, yeah, I think the economy of storytelling is really where I need to get to, and where we can all kind of discuss. And to give you an example, I watched an episode of Line of Duty, any one of them, just pick one. And there's so much in the story. Or Luther, actually. I was amazed by Luther. There's so much in the story, and in such a short space of time. Or even, I screamed for some of you guys, the opening 4 minutes of Silence of the Lambs. Holy cow. You know everything about Clarice Starling after the first 4 minutes. You don't need a character introduction, right? And all she's doing is training at Quantico. FBI headquarters, and she's going to meet her boss. So to give you an example, little things that they do. She gets into the elevator, and she's the only woman in the elevator, and she was surrounded by 5 or 6 big FBI guys. That says volumes, right? So this is kind of the sort of gold standard that we want to get to, is to be able to create these stories with just very, very simple minimalist imagery. Right? All right, so here's the conundrum, right? Let's go back to Exist, the story of the soldiers fighting ghosts. So I know a few things about Exist, right? So first of all, you guys know about the premise of the mother being inside the kid's head. And what's it like to live 24/7 with your mom inside your head, right? But she's also a soldier, right? Now, the mom's core wound is that she's not perfect enough for her mother. She's a perfectionist, like to the nth degree. She wants to be perfect. What I want to do at some point in the story, have her so frustrated, she embraces evil briefly. She's sick of being the perfect person, the perfect girl. She's sick of always doing everything right. She's sick of pleasing everybody, right? It's kind of like, Frozen, the let it go moment, except the opposite. She gets drawn into, I'm good at what I do, I'm going to get respect. So I want to have that sort of moment for her. For the main character, I want him to understand, I haven't quite figured out what it is for my main character yet, to be honest. But obviously one of them is she has to come to terms with a mom that he thinks abandoned him, right? So that's a sort of a big thing. And what better way to get over abandonment than to surround the main character with their parent 24/7, right? So there's no hiding. So there's that. But I also know at the end of the first season, the whole crux of it is that the lead demon, Bale, is inside his mother's actual body. So the actual body's wandering around there, causing all kinds of havoc, right? And so there's that good versus evil thing. But at the end, there's obviously going to be an epic battle and confrontation, right? Where the mother and son have to work together to defeat Bale. But the mother's body, she can't return to the mother's body. I don't know how yet, but I want that to be a situation. She cannot go back yet. And Bale gets banished from the body and runs into the kid. And that's the big reveal at the end, is that, oh my God, Bale's actually in here with me, right? So now, the reason why I wanted to do this, sounds overly complicated, but I wanted to create a metaphorical situation of devil on one shoulder, angel on the other, right? Kind of, not really, right? But just the idea that this kid's body is a battleground for the mother and the demon is just something I really, really want to toy with. But how we get there is important. How the kid feels when that happens is really important. Because at that moment, I want the kid to be kind of okay with his mom, but unsure. And he's just kind of like, we still got issues. I'm not good with you yet. And then suddenly his mom's in danger inside him, right? So it's like, now you have to decide really how you feel about your mom, right? So these are the emotional pieces I want to shuffle around. Now the actual story of the pilot has changed. Originally, the external event that I wanted to create for the pilot was that there was it's all set inside one council estate, and for some reason, each apartment becomes a gateway to another section of hell. It's kind of like Buffy's Hellmouth, really, where the Hellmouth was underneath the high school, kind of. I want to try to find a different interpretation of it. The reason why I'm thinking about the council flat is this is where my main character's dad lives and where effectively he lives. And it's one location. So budget-wise, if we can keep it in one location, then it's much more attractive, right? So that's sort of the thing. I want that vibe of street level, sort of council estate kind of thing. And we can get away with demons butchering people inside this council estate because nobody on the outside world cares about them, right? It's just like, oh, another murder at this Evergreen Flats or whatever. And so for me, that's a statement on society, maybe touches ever so lightly on the Grenfell Tower kind of thing, maybe. I don't know if I want to go there. But you see what I mean? When I'm starting to fabricate a story, I want to see what the broader context is and what I can bring in that really helps the story, but also makes some kind of small statement. Not deliberately. I don't like to be ham-fisted and beat a social message into people. I just like to have it interwoven as part of the fabric of the story. So yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, whereabouts would it be set? You said council flat, but as in what sort of city or area? Because that would determine what sort of slang was used or what sort of ethnicity.
I'd have to turn that over to you guys. I really wouldn't know. And that's been my biggest problem is everything that I've written here in this country has got an American voice to it. Right? So it's really, I wrote my first sort of half page of Welsh dialogue. Well, I had a few people read it, but they were relatives because it's nice and safe with relatives. The first step. People say don't ever get feedback from friends or relatives because they'll say nothing but positive things. But it's a great first step, right? Because if you're unsure and you're insecure, it's a good first step, and then you move on to the outside world. But apparently it's okay. It's not bad. Don't know. So yeah, but that is one thing that I'm working to develop as well is my understanding of regional dialects and differences in the way people speak. I've chosen for my study material all the scripts from Silent Witness and all the scripts from Luther because that's the kind of tone that I'm interested in. Right? So yeah. So I'm again open to suggestions. Where does this take place? It'd be nice if it was set in Swansea because I'm trying to develop this as something that we could possibly shoot here. One of the things that I really need as a focus is that every person in every flat where a story takes place, they have to be human. So I want to get the ex-hooker and the drug dealer story out of them. Right? Let's forget about that, right? Or the person on the welfare cheat, right? Whatever. Forget. Those are cliche, right? Let's get those out. Forget about them, and then let's start to explore what happened to this family. Why are they there? Are they trying to get out? Or are they happy there? Right? What happens to create that condition? The wonderful thing about the block of flats is I'm hoping it allows you guys complete creative freedom because anything happens. Anything happens, right? So the whole idea is Bale is trying to open up all of these doors to let his minions come through, and so it's kind of what I'm picturing in my head is kind of like, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the tendrils of time. It's that kind of thing, but the tendrils all connect to a particular flat, right? And so anything can come through. It's really open. I want it as open as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, right? So it could be anything. It could be vampires, it could be werewolves, it could be anything, right? I would prefer it if we invented demons. I think that would be a lot cooler. And we created our own caste system and our own hierarchy and that kind of a thing. But it's really sort of open. The first episode, there's no story, right? So there's no story yet. It's the first 20 pages or so is origin stuff. But what is the first dilemma? So it's interesting to me. I had this visual a couple of days ago. It's like 3 years from the time where the Raven mother walks off into the distance. She still dresses an SAS soldier and she walks off in the distance. 3 years later, we see her again, and she's very much House of Cards style in a suit, right? And she's in a board meeting, and she's talking about budget cuts and liquidating people because they need to lay off a bunch of people because they need to increase their profits for that year. Fine. And then everybody in the board meeting gets up, they go out, and they shoot everybody on the office floor, right? And I thought, okay, that's cool. There's something about that I like, right? It's like a social statement, but she would do that. Bale would do that. He's just that evil, right? So I'm like, okay, I want to do something like that somewhere, right? So I've just taken that and filed that away. And I may abandon it, use it for another story, but it's something I want to explore. So I'm currently going, does that fit the pilot? Would that be cool to put in now? Yeah.
Have you seen Mindhunter?
The Hannibal Lecter one?
Yeah, sort of. It's like a group of FBI agents, and they study serial killers.
No, okay, yeah.
At the end of each episode, there's like a 3-minute snippet that continues at the end of each episode. It's 3 minutes, and it's just one story that continues. So you have that character, and right at the end of each episode, as a sort of build up to the finale, have that character doing things such as what you just said. So it doesn't interfere with
no, I like that. That's good.
Story.
Yeah, that's really, really good.
So every episode it could change to something more sinister.
Yeah. It's like every episode there's some sort of sense of satisfaction because the main quest is finished, but Bale has just got this larger plan.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's great. That's really, really cool. Yeah, let's keep that in mind.
Or should I have held the stupid stick
Oh, yeah, I forgot to bring in the stupid stick. Ah, man, I forgot again. I'm going to definitely bring in a stupid stick, for sure. No, that's good. I love that. That's really cool. So, I am open to what that central idea is. I still have to introduce the team as well. So, I was toying with who's on the team, and this is the important consideration. Not that we have a team of guys who go in and can kill ghosts. But why them? Why are they chosen? Okay, so the synopsis is it's just about a group of military guys who hunt the paranormal, led by this main character Mark, who has the spirit of his mother trapped in his head. Right? So
literally or metaphorically?
Literally.
Okay.
She's in there. There's a moment where he's like not feeling good, and he's in his high school, and he's in the washroom, washes his face, looks up, and his mother's staring back at him. He's like, "Ah!" You know, that kind of thing. The visual I have in my head is just this 15-year-old, I think I made a 15-year-old kid with a scruffy backpack on and just hand-me-down clothes, leading 6 toughened SAS soldiers into a battle, right? That's kind of the visual I have in my head. I think, yeah, that's pretty cool. So they have to have him as part of the team because their commanding officer is in his head. But why else do they need him on the team? I want to figure that out because he has to play more of an important role. He can't just be there because he's carrying after the team. Yeah, but there has to be some reason. And I think loosely I'm thinking it might be tied to the reason why he can hold his mother's spirit. There might be something, not a chosen one story, but something about him that makes him different or special, or I want to try to figure that out without being heavy-handed about this central character. Right? It's easy to the danger of chosen one stuff is that once you make a main character a chosen one, you've suddenly disconnected your audience. Right? There's no relating to a chosen one. And the reason why I wanted to make that Mark character a street kid is relatability, right? The underdog, relatability, So I don't know. I might just even abandon all of that, give him some sort of special ability. I mean, because it really just says, yeah, you as ordinary people can follow along with this story, but you can never be him. So I don't know about that. So I loosely originally wrote this idea that inside this block of flats between 2 apartment doors, an entire corridor becomes sort of where 2 worlds cross, right? So it becomes like a rift area. So demons are populating this one hallway, right? They can't get out, but a kid gets caught in that hallway. So the team has to go and rescue the kid. So that was the loose premise. I think I did write a few pages of that in the beginning, but I later abandoned it because I wanted the pilot to have something a little bit more personal to the main character's story, right? It might even be the first confrontation with Bale, maybe. I don't know whether or not to save that for something later. It's definitely, Bale's got to be involved somehow, I think, in their initial confrontation, but I'm not entirely sure yet. Right? So that's what I want to kind of leave you guys with. And again, I will update the first 15 pages that I've written and load it up. What we'll probably do to end off today's session is I'll get everybody sort of signed up on F-Track.
Okay, guys, that's the end of session 2. It was pretty good, actually. I quite enjoyed it. I'm finding it very, very difficult to break out of lecturer mode. God, I need some help with that, guys. But, hey, a little bit of discussion on structure, a little bit of my Excel spreadsheet. I know, it's, you know what? I do enjoy the old-fashioned process of cue carding. I'm a firm believer in the story wall. I'm just trying to bring my process, not into the digital age, but allowing to connect up my thought process so I can access things a lot quicker. So one of the things I didn't talk about with my Excel spreadsheet is the fact that each of the different cells, scene cells, also feed into the action notes of my storyboard software. So it's a wonderful way for me to keep all my digital tools cohesively on the same sort of page. I'm going to introduce, or I think I have introduced to the group, using F-Track to sort of gauge our progress and that kind of thing. And I guess I'm trying to introduce the digital forum in terms of how we approach creative ideation and iterations and that kind of a thing. So it'll be interesting. I think the only reason I'm giving this a go is because in this sort of, I guess, simulated environment, there isn't really any risk in terms of financial or investment. So we have the opportunity to experiment a little bit. I'm going to try to impose some deadlines. We'll see how we go with that without the pressure of a paycheck and without the pressure of deliverables and satisfying investors. Those deadlines that you put in place are more just a philosophical thing. But we'll give it a go and see where we end up. A lot of that one interesting idea that I gravitated towards, where I mentioned my whole boardroom scene, and just talking about, sometimes you have a visual that you think, this is going to be really good, it's going to fit in the story. I don't know where it's going to fit, but it's going to fit in my story. And then the recommendation from one of the group, why don't you tack that on as a teaser ending? And I'm like, wow, I can really see that. That could be a running thing within the series. It's definitely something I would have fun playing with in terms of structuring the story. And as discussed in the group, having Bale get progressively worse with each sort of ending. I'm going to try and talk about the value of mapping out a season next episode, and a couple of tips and tricks that I have for that. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope you check in with us again next week, and I will talk to you guys later.